I have just learned for the first time in my life, 64 years, I've just learned through this film, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick, that the concentration camps in Nazi Germany were built with the power of American corporations, and all of Nazi Germany was running on American ball bearings. Congress actually passed Trading with the Enemy Acts, and there were American corporations, especially Ford Motor Company, who provided all of the physical equipment to make the trucks for Nazi Germany that moved the war machine and the ball bearings. The Jews were being exterminated, but the people who resisted the government were turned into slave laborers that were building the bombs and the tanks and the machinery. There was an enormous slave labor force connected with the concentration camps. Here, check this out. This is the planned reality of World War II by powerful interests feeding the war machine on both sides, feeding the war machine in America and in Nazi Germany and in Italy and in other places.
Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt were seen in the Martha's Vineyard area just prior to the accident. Once again, it's the same dirty people pulling the same dirty tricks. The media's treatment of this affair destroyed.
So this film basically covers the JFK cover-up. It shows that there were 8 snipers and there were eyewitnesses of each of the people who had shot. And there was an enormous worldwide media cover-up and a wonderful revelation that there were mafia agents who were around the Edward Kennedy car crash. And the reporting
destroyed any chance Edward Kennedy might have had of becoming president. And we do now have to wonder if this was yet another example of the CIA controlling public opinion. To the same end, it is also now clear why such venerable institutions as the BBC and other prominent European broadcasters have assisted in the cover-up. They always knew the Kennedy assassination was a can of worms, and that if the whole truth in the story were pursued vigorously, it would lead right back to the case of Auschwitz and the obscene profits which Europe's royalty and heads of state made from their investments in slave labor.
The entire reality of World War II was planned beforehand as a war between England and Germany, and the world powers that be were building both sides and profiting off of all of it. This seems impossible, but this video documentary is very simple, and now with the internet, so much information and truth is flooding out. This is the fascinating thing right here. Follow this.
This is a brutal truth which the West must now confront, and an equally brutal problem the United States must now face is the question of what has happened to the US military in the intervening years since it murdered its own commander-in-chief. The answer is that America's armed forces are now completely controlled by the American mafia. The mob don't even need hitmen anymore. They use United States Marines as assassins. They are, as Sam Giancana said, one organization who keep a low profile while they control the world.
The CIA and the mafia are one organization who keep a low profile while they control the whole world as a business.
And in an effort to prove this is so, in 1998, Pastor Rick Strawcutter videotaped a quite remarkable interview with Kay Pollard Griggs, formerly the wife of Colonel George Griggs, who for many years was the head of NATO. He was also an alcoholic of that well-known kind, who are shy and unable to communicate when they are sober, but who then cannot stop talking once they have a drink. During the course of a stormy marriage, punctuated by periods of domestic violence, which cost Kay Griggs many black eyes and broken bones, she learned that her husband had been turned into a brutal psychopath as a consequence of his military training, which included induction into what is known as the Pink Triangle, the Cherry Marines. Over the years, far too much has been written about Lee Harvey Oswald. But what is remarkable is that few historians were ever aware that, like most Marines who worked in intelligence, he was home.
This is a quick tour of the sexual and homosexual activities that moved into American military partly after many German high brass were brought into the American military after the Nazi war. This practice of sexual initiation for people in political office and for people in military high command is a non-stop reality.
Homosexually recruited, and was part of the same-sex club, which included Jack Ruby, George Senator, and David Ferrie. Kay Griggs explains that these selection procedures came into the US military when the cream of the death's head sporting Nazi top brass joined the American ranks at the war's end. Ever since then, the Greek and Spartan traditions which Hitler so admired, and which were integral to the German army, have found their way into American military culture and are now manifest in the way that the old skull and bones procedure for identifying and, most importantly, controlling rising stars is now used to select the top brass of the future. In a nutshell, boy soldiers who want to rise in the ranks can only do so by doing favors for the older men.
So George Bush, I mean, all these people rise up to the ranks on the same club. No wonder, I saw a little TV clip one time where a reporter was asking George Bush and others about the Order of the Skull and Bones.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America?
I mean, if this really got out, that these guys are all inducted because they've got some kind of homosexual thing on them.
Indoctrination. Or induction. They have to do that.
Yeah.
They do that.
Yeah. Even
in a coffin. And it's even now coming into the military totally. The chiefs do that. They put them in the coffin. They do the bowling ball trick.
Okay, you're going to explain this. What happens when you get in the coffin? Why do you get in a coffin?
Oh, they get, when you get your eagles, that's a German thing.
Okay.
It's what the German high command did, and most of them, had the boyfriends and stuff, the Krupps and all of that. It is a German thing that they say goes back to Greece, and it's all the male Marine-looking men that they do it with. See? So now the chiefs have to do that. What they do is George said it's like a zoo. They get everybody really drunk, and they sometimes call it dining in. Shellback is another time that they do it. Not everybody does it, but the ones who do it, if they're young, they get right up to the top. It's a...
Okay, well, what actually do they do? They've got a coffin, they get inside
anal sex. Oh, that. They put them in the coffin and they do things.
This is how military recruits are now controlled. And the mafia military exert a similar hold over all career politicians. At some time on the way up, they are maneuvered into a compromising position, usually through the use of two-way mirrors in a brothel. And once the mafia military have got something on them, the career politicians, judges, senior police officers, and media moguls face a stark choice. Either take your payoff, which is usually worth millions of dollars, or go to jail for life for your misdemeanor. It is with these kinds of tactics, first used by Sam Giancana in the 1930s, that what are now known as the 5 mafia families of the New York metropolitan area, the Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Colombo, and the Bonanno, control all politics in the United States, and through their business arrangements with the 5-star generals and CIA, control all cocaine and heroin trafficking throughout the entire world. After the dust had settled on the Kennedy assassination, Sam Giancana explained to his younger brother that the mob and the CIA had taken care of JFK together because they were essentially two sides of the same coin. In the last 50 years, that relationship between these two secret societies has become even closer, to the point where they are now indistinguishable. The people who live in the third world are so well aware of what is really going on, they have come to call the CIA the cocaine importing agency. The World Wide Web now abounds with proof to back this up. And although many people were skeptical at first about Kay Griggs, in recent times her most sensational claims have been fully endorsed by the FBI chief Ted Gunderson, who gave several interviews in support.
This cult was involved in distributing drugs up and down the East Coast, drugs that were being flown in from Southeast Asia in military and planes. The operation was by the certain Army personnel and also CIA. She told me that there were generals involved in the drug operation. There were police officers and at least 2 attorneys in the Fayetteville, North Carolina area. The path that this led me down is mind-boggling. Over the last 23, 24 years, I have developed so much information about the situation as it exists in our great country and gone public with it as much as possible, and yet I am being ignored.
What is basically happening is that the United States military use Air Force bases in Europe to connect with the third world, particularly Pakistan and Afghanistan, where the poppy fields are cultivated. This is the real reason for the conflict in Afghanistan. It's to protect the record harvests of heroin, which almost ended when the Taliban took power. But they don't tell the soldiers this, and it's a truth you'll never hear on NBC or BBC. Having brought the refined cocaine and heroin into Europe and the United States, it is then passed on to the mafia for sale at street level, sometimes by police officers in uniform. It's an arrangement which nets the generals and the mafia chiefs billions, and the fact that someone of Ted Gunderson's credibility was completely ignored when he went public with this information underlines the fact that our entire mainstream media, as well as the entire justice system, has been bought off.